Hello, everyone. I want to talk to you guys about the Balkans, Yugoslavia, the war that took place there, the events that preceded it. I have been reading this book. It is called Kosovo Crisis by Vojan Joksomovic. And I will say that it is a very fascinating read. I am learning things that I did not know. I'm learning things that I did not know about. It reminds me of the book that I read last year called Poland's Holocaust by Tadeusz Petrowski. And that book talks about all of the massacres of the Poles during the Second World War. It talks about the persecution of Polish people by the Soviet Union. And the book went into great detail about the Nazis, the Ukrainian Nazis, the ultra-nationalist Ukrainian thugs who butchered tens of thousands of Polish civilians while getting supported by the Third Reich. And that book was very eye-opening. I knew about Bandera, and I knew about the fact that there were a lot of Nazis in Ukraine, and there are still a lot of Nazis in Ukraine. But I never really got seriously into the details until I read that book. And I get a similar feeling with this book, because this book gives you graphic detail as to what occurred before the outbreak of war in the 1990s in Yugoslavia. So, for example, we talk about Croatia. Today, not really a whole lot of people talk about the fact that during the Second World War, a lot of Croatians were Nazis. A lot of Croatians joined the Nazis so that they could kill Serbs. The Germans gave the Croats their own independent state, and the Germans empowered a certain individual to rule over Croatia. His name was Ante Pavelić. And under Ante Pavelić's Nazi-backed regime, around 1 million people or so were butchered by his army of ultra-nationalists known as the Ustaša. And their main victims were Serbs. Just like the main victims of the Ukrainian nationalists fighting for Ukrainian historical heroes like Stepan Bandera or Andrei Melnik were Poles. And they killed a lot of Jewish people as well. Their goal was to make a pure Ukrainian state, and they wanted to purge the others. And their main enemies were the Jews and the Poles. The biggest massacre that they committed was the massacre of Volyn, the Volyn massacre, which took place in areas like Volyn. It took place in East Galicia, Lvov, and they butchered around 100,000 or so Polish people. Well, these butchers, these murderers, they were no different than the Ustaša. They were no different than the Croatian lunatics who butchered hundreds of thousands of Serbs. And a lot of these Ustaša guys, like the Ukrainian nationalists, escaped justice. A lot of them escaped justice. A lot of these Ukrainians who were mass murderers went to the United States. For example, the main orchestrator of the Volyn massacre was Mykola Lebed. And where did Mykola Lebed go? Mykola Lebed went to the United States, where he became a Cold War asset. He became a propagandist for the Cold War, advancing the ideology of Ukrainian nationalism. And the CIA and the Ukrainian Cold War operatives worked together to whitewash the crimes of the Ukrainian nationalists in order to justify, through a smokescreen, America's support for Ukrainian ultranationalists. Stepan Bandera also worked with the West. He was working with the German government as a Cold War operative. Luckily, he did not escape justice because the Soviets sent an assassin to kill him. Mykola Lebed, on the other hand, no one really has even heard of Mykola Lebed, except for people who really study these historical matters. We talk about Stepan Bandera, we talk about Andrei Melnich, and these were all murderers, criminals, no doubt. But the mastermind, and I hate to use that word mastermind because it sounds like I'm praising this guy as a genius. I sound like one of those women who love true crime novels, or like, oh, he was a genius serial killer. And I don't like using that kind of language. But the main organizer, the main culprit, the perpetrator of the Volyn massacre was Mykola Lebed. Who's ever heard of him? Not many people. And you can go to the United States, you can go to, I believe, Pennsylvania, and you can see his tombstone. It's crazy. I know. Nonfiction is crazier than fiction. I don't know why people read novels, to be honest with you. I'm checking the mic. I don't know why people read novels, like fiction. I guess you like the story or whatever, all power to you. But just for me personally, I like to read nonfiction because nonfiction is reality and it's crazier than some story that someone has come up with in their head. Now, a lot of Croats escaped to the United States, and they also went to Argentina. And a lot of them escaped through what is known as the Vatican rat line. They were people in the Vatican who helped Croatian mass murderers escape Europe. And they went to Argentina, they went to the United States. In the case of the massacre of the Serbs, one of the people responsible for this was Andrija Artukovic. Now, the author of this book, he put a photograph of Mr. Artukovic, and I just want to show you guys this monster's face. Look at this guy. This is Ante Pavelic, but I'm talking about this guy over here. Look at this guy. Hold on, I got to get the camera right here. Look at this guy. He looks like a mummy. Doesn't really look like a human being. I mean, I know he's human and everything, but he looks like he has no soul, like a skeleton, like a mummy that's still alive. This guy escaped to California pretending to be a Roman Catholic priest. That's right. And somehow that worked because he said, he didn't say I'm a Roman Catholic priest from Croatia. He said, I'm a Roman Catholic priest from Ireland. How the hell does a Croatian guy get away with pretending to be an Irish Roman Catholic priest? Like, how does that cover-up work? I don't know how. But he was extradited, eventually, back to Zagreb, where he was found guilty of being a mass murderer, and he was sentenced to death in 1986. But he died in prison before the execution could be carried out. But a lot of these Nazis escaped. They escaped, and for example, Ante Pavelic, the dictator who was ruling over the German-created Croatian state, He escaped to Argentina after the Second World War with a false passport created from the Vatican's rat line. And he actually became the security advisor for the Argentinian dictator Juan Perón. And because of this, through his influence, Juan Perón's government issued 34,000 visas to Croatian war criminals. And they all escaped justice. They all escaped justice, everybody. And you see these constant parallels in our modern day history. Constant parallels. For example, like I said before, Ukrainians committed mass murder. They escaped to America. They help with the Cold War. From mass murderers, they become heroes. There is a saying, one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter. I really hate this, to be honest with you. I understand that through the perspective of some people, a mass murderer can be a hero. But I hate this reality. I really just hate this reality. Because what it shows is that we cannot simply see evil for what it is. We tend to look at things through the lens of prejudice and bias. So if you're Polish and you hear about Bandera, you think, oh, he's a mass murderer. Or you hear about Mikola Lebed, oh, he's a mass murderer. Or any one of these OUN operatives, Andrei Melnik, Roman Shtuktovich, or however you say his last name, all these mass murderers. But you talk to a Ukrainian, and he may tell you, well, those guys were heroes. Well, they're mass murderers. Oh, no, that's not true. Or they may just be proud of it. For example, here's some very, very strange Croatian humor for you. In Croatia, I check these mics. I check this mic because sometimes a switch will go off accidentally, and I want to make sure I'm still being heard. In Croatia, there is a town called Jastrebarsko. Jastrebarsko, very Slavic sounding name. And in front of Jastrebarsko is a sign that says, "Welcome to Jastrebarsko. It's a great town for children." Why the hell would a town have a sign to welcome people saying it's a great town for kids? I looked into Jastrebarsko, and I found out that it was once the home of the Jastrebarsko concentration camp for Serbian children, where over 1,000 Serbian kids were murdered by the Ustasha. So this is like Croatian humor. Serbs say that this town had the concentration camp for Serbian kids. We're going to say in the welcoming sign, at the welcoming sign of our town, it's a great place for kids. Very bizarre humor. It's kind of like what some people do when it comes to denying genocide. I've seen this before. There was a Turkish professor, I believe in California. I'm pretty certain he was in California. Back in the early 2000s. I can't find this story on Google. If someone can help me with this, I'd be greatly appreciative. But I remember reading this story in a book back in like 2000 and, I don't know, 4 or 5 or something. And it talked about this Turkish professor who was upset because there were some Armenian students on the campus grounds who were protesting the Turkish government for its denial of the Armenian genocide. The Turkish professor yelled at these Armenians. I think he may have spat on them. He yelled at these Armenian students saying, "There was no massacre, but I really wish there was a massacre." And they'll play this little game where it's like, well, there was no massacre, but I really wish there was a massacre. And in a way, they are implicitly admitting to the fact that this massacre took place, right? And this sort of thing happens. I've seen another phenomenon, this is less common, when they will actually admit to a massacre happening, but they will then boast about it. They will be proud of this. And I've seen this sort of thing before. For example, I have talked about one of the most horrendous massacres in the post-World War II era, Srebrenica massacre, which took place in the 1980s in Lebanon during the Lebanese Civil War. The PLO, Palestinian Liberation Organization, had made a peace agreement, or basically a surrender to the Israeli-backed Lebanese nationalists, Lebanese Maronite Catholic nationalists, and the PLO agreed to leave the refugee camps of Sabra and Shatila, and they did. They left, and all that was left in the camps were women and children and elderly and some men, most of them, almost all of them, unarmed. The Phalangists, the Kataib, these Maronite Catholic nationalists, they decided to do a massacre. They went into the camps and butchered thousands of people, and they spent 3 days killing around 3,000 people or so. Every time I've talked about this massacre, I've had Lebanese Maronites go on the comments section and basically saying that what they did was the right thing. Like, they don't even deny it. It's crazy. It's insane. But you just see these parallels. You see these parallels. Croats go to America after mass murdering hundreds of thousands of people, and they become heroes. Ukrainians butcher hundreds of thousands of people. They go to America. They become Cold War assets. You just see this crazy, crazy parallel. It's amazing. It really is amazing. I think I've talked long enough. I want to talk some more about some of the things I have found in this book, but I'll do it in a subsequent video. I just thought I would talk about this. It's very, very dark stuff, guys. Very dark. Anyway, you guys have just heard some theology. God bless.